Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to day 6 of Teaser season for patch 0.5.0. Today, nothing brand new out of Runic Games, but there was so much announced yesterday that it's time to buckle in for a breakdown of what I think are the good, the bad, the ugly, and a bunch of things that you might have missed in yesterday's major livestream reveal. Obviously, you can see from the background here, I have taken an image of one of the Ascendancies related to the duelist in Path of Exile 1, and the big text, "Not you." This was not something I created. This was something that was shared over on the website formerly known as Twitter by a Runic Games employee. Everyone immediately assumed, oh, okay, well that's one of the Ascendancies we're not getting for the duelist because they've come up with different duelist Ascendancies. Nah, there's just no duelist at all. So that's going to be one of the things that comes up in the bad section, but a little bit more on that later. I wanted to start though by saying that yesterday I did my full initial reporting on the live stream from Runic Games, and that's still up on YouTube if you want to see it. So I'll put a link to that down in the description below. It'll be listed as the day 5 video. It's pretty long. I think it's about an hour and a quarter. So that'll be a chance to watch the entirety of the original live stream plus my own commentary on it. There's a couple of things that you might have missed, and I'm going to pepper a few of these into this video. The first one is that most endgame content can be traded in 0.5.0. So items like breachstones and the like, these generally were tradable in 0.4.0 as well. Path of Exile 2 has generally made almost all of the endgame content tradable, but this is going to be the case except for one, and that is the first time that you get access to any of the new endgame areas. So the first breachstone you get, you're going to have to get that one yourself. But after that, you're going to be able to trade for them. Now, I know some of you are Path of Exile 1 and 2 players. For those of you, this is going to be like the way the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds work in Path of Exile 1. The first time, it's pretty much free to access, but it's also completely untradeable. Subsequent times, you get a tradable item. You can either use that to experience the fight again yourself and potentially get more and different loot, or alternately, you can then on-sell it to someone else. Your choice. You've got agency there. You can specialize in killing this boss if you want. You can just sit on the Faustus auction house in Path of Exile 1, buy up all of these invites, run them immediately, sell the loot, or alternately, you can earn these invites and sell them to other players. Or you can just do the ones you loot yourself. You've got that agency. That's coming to Path of Exile 2 for pretty much everything. No agency over the first one, full agency over the second and subsequent. There's going to be a big area called the Fortress, which is where most of the endgame content that's not the endgame Infinite Atlas, that's going to mostly take place there. I want to start with the positive things and then get through those, and then after that we'll start talking about some of the less positive things. The single most interesting thing, and I don't think that many people have been talking about this to me, was Runic Ward. Now, Runic Ward's implementation is nothing like Ward's implementation in Path of Exile 1. For those of you that aren't Path of Exile 1 players, the way that Ward works there, it's kind of like Energy Shield, except the numbers on it are more generous than you would get from a comparable source of Energy Shield. And when you take a hit, all of your ward is applied to it. So your ward is lost first, but your ward breaks at that point. So if you've got 1,000 ward and you take a hit for 75 damage, then all that 75 damage is eaten by your ward, but your ward has become broken at that point, and it doesn't regenerate for a couple of seconds afterwards. Now, what that means is that taking tiny hits is really detrimental to it. Runic Games have decided they want something completely different for Ward's implementation in Path of Exile 2. And the way it's going to work actually is going to be something that's beneficial to life builds. The reason for this is that life builds and energy shield builds are going to gain comparable amounts of this new resource. However, those of you that are playing energy shield builds, you actually take more damage than the life builds do. If you're playing an energy shield build, you have very limited access to both armor and evasion. So when a monster hits you, it hits you for full damage. Whereas if you're playing a life build, you either have armor or you have evasion, or potentially you have a bit of both. And so if you've got evasion, sometimes when an enemy hits you, it actually doesn't hit you. Sometimes it bounces off your deflection rating instead. And if you've instead focused on armor, then you're just going to take less damage. So what this means is that with Runic Ward, it simply goes further on life builds than it does on an energy shield build. With that in mind, I don't know if the numbers on Runic Ward are going to be enough for this to be a big buff to life builds to make them competitive with how dominant Energy Shield has tended to be, but it is definitely something that's going to close the gap, and I'm excited to see how that plays out. Secondly, we have the Endgame Overhaul, and there is so much to talk about here. I think I need to do an entire separate video on each aspect of the endgame and how it's being overhauled. So the key things are that the Infinite Atlas is going to remain. However, it's only going to be a part of the endgame. You'll also have access to a new Infinite Atlas in the sea. That's going to be the new way that logbooks are going to play out from expeditions. And on top of that, you're going to have a big area called the Fortress. The Fortress is possibly going to be a lot of where your endgame mapping takes place, and it's an area you'll have more agency over the tile sets that you choose, whereas the Infinite Atlas is going to feel more random. The way that I think things are going to play out, you are going to initially explore the Infinite Atlas a little bit. You're going to do this in order to build character power and to get access to various keys that you're then going to use in order to access some of the specific encounters that take place in the Fortress. Then you're going to go into the Fortress, you're going to run those particular encounters, and then through doing this, you're going to get big buffs to all of your mapping that takes place anywhere, because this is going to be how you unlock your Atlas points. And then that's going to mean you've got more agency. The maps that you do out in the general wild world, they're going to start feeling juicier and more interesting, and you'll have more control over the encounters that you find there. Over time, you're then going to be able to complete the entirety of the Fortress, and when you complete the entirety of the Fortress, then the maps that you do inside and outside the Fortress, they're just going to be much more filled with encounters than they were in 040. That's the goal grinding gear games are going for. Exactly how well they hit that is not clear yet, and that's something we're going to have to find out once we're actually able to play it. But I'm definitely quite hyped for that. The next thing that I want to raise as one of the best things, new gems. New gems are always exciting, but the particulars of these are really interesting. So some of these new gems, what they're going to allow you to do is spend Runic Ward as a resource. The key thing about these though, is that these gems are going to have no attribute requirements. So if you get a gem that does something that is spell-like, that would synergize well with your build, but you don't have any intelligence on your character, then you can use one of these new gems that is Runic Ward fueled, and you'll just be able to use that. You won't need to build intelligence into your character. So I'm excited to see how this changes around some of the build constraints that exist in Path of Exile 2 at the moment. Fourth is the build importer. This is possibly the single best thing, and it's getting talked about a little bit, but it's not getting talked about enough. I do, however, want to say that I almost put this into the ugly section as well, because this is going to have some consequences. So a quick overview of what the build importer is. The build importer is a new file type that Grinding Gear Games are creating that you'll be able to create through various tools like Path of Building. You will then be able to import them into game and have a look at the build and then potentially spec your character that way. And it'll be something that will give you the setup of the passive tree. It'll give you advice on gearing. Now, the good thing for this is going to be absolutely fantastic if there are easy to follow beginner guides that become really popular. Then this build importer is just going to make the ability to follow them much easier than it is currently. However, there are some problems here. The first problem is if there are builds that come out, .build files, that have some fundamental problem with them. They're a genuinely good build, but there's just one or two little mistakes on them that take an experienced eye to pick up. Now, if these get widely popularized, you might have this situation where someone says, hey, I'm playing this Sergog build, it's feeling really terrible, and what they haven't realized is that I haven't explained properly how to craft the spear. So they've gone and they've picked up a spear that looks superficially similar to the one that I recommended using, but it's missing something important. They haven't seen that connection, and as a result, the build that they're playing ends up feeling terrible. An example might be if I was to build a character that had the accuracy stacking shenanigans that are possible on one of the Huntress Ascendancies. If you were to go down that path and they didn't understand how important the explicit modifier accuracy was, and the reason they don't understand that is because I didn't write it in clearly enough, then that player can get into a really awkward spot as a result there. So basically builds that are not bad builds, but that are imperfectly explained. They're going to be really prevalent and they're going to be a bit of a problem. The second possibility here is outright troll builds. I don't think we're going to see this, but I do think it is plausible that we might see some links to some .build files that are just absolutely terrible. But people think, oh, that looks really cool, and they get baited in. That was something that could already happen. But the thing is that because there is a higher level of build knowledge that's required to follow someone else's build at the moment, that means that there is a bit more of a barrier to conversion for those people that are making troll builds. And as a result, it doesn't really happen. The third problem is actually what this is going to do when there is a build that is extremely good. I'm not necessarily saying completely broken, I'm just saying a build that is as good as day one grenades were in 0.4.0. So talking about a build that is very, very strong, very easy to communicate how to play it. People just play it and it works. What this build importer is going to do is it's going to reduce the barrier to rolling a character like that, and it's going to therefore result in more hegemonization of what builds people are playing, and that is going to cause some messy effects when it comes to pricing of items in trade leagues. You might see that certain reagents end up exploding in price really quickly because it is now quicker and easier, there's less friction involved for other people to get involved and making that character themselves. A bit of an example of what this might look like in practice. A build guy comes out and says, you should have a 470 DPS spear at this point. And then you see people that follow the build guide exactly, they go and they buy the 470 DPS spears, and they don't even consider one that's 468 because it doesn't fit what the build guide says. This already happens a bit with the current system of copying builds, but it's going to be something that will be more common as there's more prevalence of people following build guides exactly. So, whilst this is an absolutely fantastic feature that's being added, and it is actually one of my complete high points of the entirety of the patch, it is going to have some problems, and we'll kind of need to be aware of those. I expect that we're going to see some wilder than usual price swings, in particular, as a result of the build importer, because it is now simply easier for someone to post a build that is genuinely good, that has a really, really weird and wonderful unique item in it, and that unique item to just have an explosion of demand really, really quickly. Fifth, we have 2 new Ascendancies that are being added. New Ascendancies are one of those things that are easy to understate how important they can be. There are just so many new options for building characters, and one of the things that's really noticeable is that from 0.4.0 onwards, Runic Games put a tremendous amount of work into all the new Ascendancies. It's shown they play differently to what already existed, but they also have really interesting things going on in them. And I'm expecting we'll see exactly the same with the new Ascendancies that are being added. Now we get to things that address specific concerns at different points of Endgame. So, Endgame Quest Guidance. I think this is going to be one of the quiet MVPs here. What this means is that players that get through the interludes and aren't really clear about what to do next, those players are going to have clear breadcrumb trails leading them to things to do in order to experience all of the new endgame mechanics. It's not just going to be a case of go run a few maps and see if you find something interesting. And if you find something interesting, maybe you'll then tier up in maps and you'll start looking around and finding more things. No, it'll be better than that because it'll be clearer what you should do. For people that are watching this video, this probably isn't that important for you because you likely already follow a bunch of Path of Exile 2 related content creators, and so have a bit of a sense as to the way this works. This is at its best for someone that fires up the game on console or even on PC, but doesn't think to look to the rest of the community in order to find out what to do. Instead, this will provide those players with a big boost to the amount of information available to them. After this, we have something that is aimed at the exact opposite end of the spectrum. So this is going to be the endgame power gamer. The options to expedite your Atlas unlocks. The first time that you do the new Atlas and the new Fortress, it's going to be a long, long process of learning exactly how it all works. But once you've done it once, when you want to start in a new league economy, you're going to be able to explode forward. As long as you know how to tier up quickly, and as long as you know exactly what the most important things are to do, you're going to be able to fill out your Atlas much faster than you can in Path of Exile 1 at the moment. You're going to be able to fill out and get back to that juicy endgame farming much quicker. That's going to be predicated upon the requirement for you to have the character power to do that, which is not going to come automatically. But if you're playing a powerful character archetype and you know exactly what you're doing, you'll be able to go from 0 to hero quicker than you've been able to do in the past. You're no longer going to need to hunt down a whole bunch of corrupted areas and then cleanse them and do a whole bunch of other things along those lines. Instead, all of those unlocks are going to come out of the fortress and you're going to be able to focus on them and do them in a really, really optimized way. Second last of the things that I consider best, and I know there's going to be people out there that are watching this and that are gutted by this, but there are going to be what I term loot fixes and Snake Temple nerfs. Now, other people are going to be thinking, oh, that was the reason I had so much fun in 0.4.0. For me, I didn't like 0.4.0 because Divine Orbs stopped being loot. Perfect Exalts, Perfect Chaos Orbs, they stopped being loot. They ended up being something like 1/30th of a single Arbiter fragment for a period, And basically, that just meant that killing regular monsters, you knew that unless you got a Hinakora's Lock, unless you got a Mirror of Kalandra, unless you got one of the very, very best exceptional bases, that ordinary monster could not provide you with any exciting loot. Well, the Snake Temples are going to be trod on, and as a result, we're no longer going to have that issue, which is going to mean that Divine Orbs are going to be exciting drop moments again, rather than being, oh yeah, I guess I'll go and I'll pick that up. Finally, there is going to be a nerf coming, according to something that was said in the Q&A, to the mandatory plus gem levels stat, but we don't have details yet, and I am not convinced this is going to be enough. Now, the reason that plus gem levels is something that I'm looking forward to seeing nerfs to, no matter what they are, and I'm hoping they're at the more severe end, is that it's one of those stats that kind of forces you to build items in certain ways. Rare items that don't have a real pathway to getting plus gem levels, they're not loot. It doesn't matter how good the other mods on them are. But it's just one of those stats where you're using pretty much the same rare items on every character. So you'll have one character that's using a crossbow and they aspire to plus 7 to gem levels. You'll have another character that's using a staff and they'll have plus 7 to gem levels. You'll have another character that is using a wand and focus and they'll have plus 5 and plus 2. Ultimately, this is just one of those things where there's less variety between characters as possible because the opportunity cost of not having this stat is so high. There's also a lot of really cool items that might start seeing use once this stat is nerfed, once there's less of it that's available on rares. We don't have firm details on what the exact changes will be though, and it may well be that they're not enough. Next, I wanted to point out something that a lot of people have missed, because I have seen a lot of people raising a complaint, not realizing Grinding Games put in something that you can use in order to potentially address this. The reason this one's so easy to miss is that it is not something that was revealed in the live stream, but it was revealed instead in Grinding Games' promotional material for it. Jado Spycraft. This is going to be one of the 3 Atlas Masters. Jado Spycraft has this option, Unexpected Missions. If you get a Corrupted Waystone, it will open maps with 1 additional random modifier that will also randomize the map area. So if you have a Maya map, you can re-roll it. You don't have any agency over what layout will actually open, but it probably won't be Maya. That's going to be something that's really good. Even if you only upgrade from Maya to Hidden Grotto, that's a big upgrade, and there's plenty of tile sets that are better than that. Next, I said I'm going through the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here are the 4 things I think are probably among the most disappointing. So firstly, of course, we can't play it yet. It's still 3-4 weeks until it comes out. That's getting my number 1 position as the worst thing about 050 so far. The second thing is that it is not including swords or axes as new weapon types. And the consequence of this is that melee is still, you're either a monk or you're slow. And the monk, there's nothing wrong with the monk as a class. It's just that it's not everyone's idea of what melee should feel like. It's something different. It's definitely solid. You've also got the spear as something else that's not really true melee, but sort of has elements of melee in it. But basically, you've got this difficult choice. Give up on the strength aligned power fantasy and play a monk, or play really, 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 really slow mace skills. And a lot of people don't really like either of those choices. Finally, I don't think I'm sold on the in-map Runes of Aldur events. I want to give these a fair go, but what we've seen so far, I'm not that excited by them. It calls to mind some of the aspects of the Archnemesis expansion in Path of Exile 1, patch 3.17. I'm not talking about the Archnemesis system as it exists now. I'm talking about the Archnemesis League that existed, where it was played out a bit differently, but where you could choose between a bunch of different ways of empowering certain monsters, and then you could fight things that were juiced up with a whole bunch of nasty shenanigans on them. I want to give this a fair go, though. It may be that this is one of those situations where simplicity plays well, but I am genuinely not sold on the Runes of Aldur in-map events as yet. Hopefully, I end up being wrong on that one. Next, I wanted to point out something that you might have missed again, because this is something that Grinding Games mostly talked up, again, on their website presentation. It wasn't really all that present in the overall live stream. And this is that certain Delirium oils, and I think this is the top 3 plus a new liquid emotion. Certain ones of these can now be used to perform remove add crafts deterministically on jewels. So you can see here that if you have a rare basic jewel, you can then augment +1 maximum fire resistance on it if it is a ruby. And also this is going to include diamonds as well. So this is going to annul a random modifier off it, and then it is going to apply this additional modifier as guaranteed. I don't yet know whether these are going to be prefixes or suffixes, but the key thing is this is a semi-deterministic way to modify jewels that could be really, really interesting. And especially if you end up in a situation where you've got two excellent prefixes on a jewel, let's just assume that one of these mods is a suffix, and then you've got two solid but non-synergistic suffix modifiers that are on it. In that case, concentrated liquid isolation would be perfect there because it's going to remove a mod that you don't care about and it's going to put something deterministically on in its place that you do care about. That's a fairly unusual situation to be in, but it will happen occasionally. So keep that in mind. Definitely some interesting stuff that you can do here. There are other versions of these that have been teased as well. Next, I want to talk about a couple of things that get categorized by me as ugly. The first one of these is that I'm just not convinced that there's enough changes to the core character power passive tree yet. There's a couple of areas on the tree that are really, really sparse. They don't have that many interesting points, and the key thing that you want to do is skill grimmage out of them. I would like to see some of those get overhauled, and I could be wrong on this. They definitely are mentioning that they're going to be putting more percentage armor applies to elemental on the tree, and that's a potentially powerful stat. That may mean that there are more changes that are coming to the passive tree than we know about. One of the main problems that I've got with the current structure of the passive tree is that there's a large number of areas where there's nodes that they can do something reasonably strong, but they're very, very niche. A good example of this would be blind effect. There is nothing wrong at all with scaling blind effect. The thing is, most people aren't interested in doing it. If you are doing it, those clusters that scale blind effect, they're fine. They're good investments in your character's power. But if you're not interested in scaling blind effect, then they're just really disappointing that they exist. They basically aren't there, and you just have to skill grimmage past them. So this is something I'm categorizing as ugly for now, but they could end up being wrong because Grinding Games might deliver more changes than they've led us to believe we're going to be expecting here. Secondly, there is the unique dual voices. This thing is cool, but I'm feeling that it might be mandatory on every build. So there are going to be three versions of this. There is one that is going to be relatively common that will grant 2 sinister dual sockets. There is another one that is going to grant 3, and another one that's going to grant 4. My understanding of the way this works is that you will allocate this and place it into a normal dual slot on your tree, and that will open up new dual slots that can only usefully accept basic jewels. Then you'll go and place your additional jewels in there. Now, there's been a bit of a problem in the past in Path of Exile 2, where Grinding Games have added things that players feel are just kind of mandatory to get on every character, but they were quite rare. And eventually what they've done is they've made them all more common. So the first one of these was Gem Cutter's Prisms. Gem Cutter's Prisms in 0.1.0, you needed 20 of them rather than 4 of them if you wanted to quality up a gem, and on top of that, they were 5 times rarer than they are now. Now, Grinding Games essentially made the GCPs 25 times easier to get because they were getting a lot of negative feedback around how rare this mandatory progression item was. I'm kind of feeling that voices could end up being in that same spot. The other thing that they've changed already was the rarity of perfect jewel orbs. These things were quite rare early on, and they got made more common over time. Again, these were just a mandatory piece of character power that was gated behind RNG. I'm concerned that voices is going to be something that pretty much goes on every build. Even if you have the worst version of it, even the one that adds only 2 sinister jewels, which I think will be fairly affordable, that's going to be an upgrade for almost everyone. Then you're going to get the one that adds 3 jewel sockets. That's going to be an amazing additional upgrade over that. And the one that adds 4 is going to be super, super chase. I feel like this is not going to play out well. It does, however, at the same time, I believe, compete with the Adorned, because I don't think you want to use voices and the Adorned together. I don't think they work. My understanding is that these new jewel sockets, the sinister jewel sockets, are not considered part of your passive tree. If they are, then the problem's even worse because Adorned builds are definitely going to feel they need voices. And just before we finish, I wanted to put in one more thing you might have missed. There is going to be a new spider boss that is coming with Expedition. We know pretty much nothing about Spidey Boy, just there is going to be this cool new Pinnacle boss. And at least I think this might be a Pinnacle boss version, or it might be a non-Pinnacle version. There's a whole lot of things we just don't know about the Expedition content that's being added. It's getting a substantial rework, and it is the foundation of the Runes of Aldur expansion. We'll find out more about these new bosses in time. There's just a lot of new bosses coming in general. I want to finish up by saying my hype level is higher than it was prior to the reveal, Even though there's a couple of things that I've been a little bit disappointed by, I think in general they're solving a lot of real problems with the game, and also they're looking like they're going to make the endgame feel more varied and more interesting, but also very, very different from Path of Exile 1's. I was expecting swords, I'm disappointed we're not getting them, but there's lots of cool stuff that's coming, including this new boss, who I'm speculating might be called the Arbiter of Divinity, although that is speculation, I could very well be wrong. That's from me just putting together little pieces from what Grinding Gear Games have revealed. It's not anything explicit that they've said, but I think they may be the new pinnacle boss, and I'm really hoping they actually replace the Arbiter of Ash, because the Arbiter of Ash is not what I would term a very well-designed fight. Anyways, that's day 6. If you want to see my first thoughts as Grinding Gear Games are doing the reveal, I'll put a link on the screen now to the day 5 video. May your Varlobs have interesting results.